That noon, the wind blew in from the sunburnt fields, carrying the scent of scorched dirt and something even drier, the silence of those who chose to watch. In the cracked square of Redemption Ridge, a girl was put up for sale like a worn-out possession. Barefoot, hands bound. Her dress hung in tatters, as if it too had grown weary of sheltering a life. The auctioneer never called her name. He listed her like one would list a tool. No deformities. Can plant corn. Knows how to keep quiet. The crowd didn't bid. They only stared, with the eyes of those passing judgment on the damned. Then a woman downed the last of her bottle, spat to the side and muttered, "She ain't worth much. But I'm tired. Anyone want her, take her." No one stepped forward. No one asked the price. The girl stood there, not bowed, not raised, like a piece of old wood not yet burned, but no longer meant to be kept. Redemption Ridge, summer 1885. That noon, the wind blew from the south, dragging with it red dust from the millet fields, stripped bare after the harvest. In the small square of Redemption Ridge, where the paving stones cracked like ancient bone, the heat didn't just scorch skin, it seared into the things people no longer dared to say. The horses tied loosely beneath the awnings didn't bother to stomp. A lone crow swept across the sky, its shadow skating over the ground like a warning. And there, at the very center of it all, stood a girl, barefoot, wrists bound, as if she were the centerpiece of a ritual no one dared to name. She was no longer young, or perhaps it was life, not years, that had worn her down. The dress she wore had once been blue. Now it hung faded and torn, caked with earth, as if it too refused to part from what it had once known. Around her ankles, dust had settled thick, not from journeying, but from years lived close to the ground, head bent, working, enduring. A few women stood at the edge of the market, fans folded in hand, murmuring to each other behind narrowed eyes. The men, most perched on the saloon steps or leaning against their wagons, spat into the dirt and scratched their beards, careful not to meet her gaze, as though her eyes might burn. The auctioneer, a broad-bellied man with a collar too tight and a voice worn raw by tobacco smoke, stood atop a makeshift platform, waving papers no one bothered to read. He didn't need to say much. Folks weren't here to buy. They came to see. The way they looked at the girl held no choice in it, only judgment. As though by standing there, she had confessed to something only the town could name. "Strong worker," the man barked. "No defects. Quiet type. Can plant corn, clean a house, hold her tongue." A dry laugh cracked out from near the blacksmith's door. Someone spit near her feet. Then came a woman's voice, rough, drunk, worn down past pain. "She ain't worth much," the woman slurred, clutching a bottle of cheap whiskey. "But I'm tired. Anyone want her? Take her." The girl didn't cry. She didn't lower her gaze, but she didn't lift her chin either. She stood like a piece of wood, old, unwanted, not yet burned but long forgotten. Silence wrapped around the square. No one moved. No one asked the price, until the faint shuffle of boots came from the back of the crowd. A man stepped forward, though no one saw him arrive, nor noticed him among them. He leaned against a post near the blacksmith's, a dust-colored duster hanging off his frame, a wide-brimmed hat shading most of his face. But when he raised his hand, just a flick, like brushing ash from his coat, the square held its breath. "I'll take her," he said. His voice was low, steady, not loud, but every soul heard it. The auctioneer blinked. You sure?" The man didn't answer. He stepped forward, his boots landing heavy but never hurried. From inside his coat, he pulled a small leather pouch and tossed it onto the stand. Gold, maybe, or silver. Maybe nothing but old coins. No one looked close. No one dared. His eyes, when they turned to the woman who'd given the girl away, held no pity, only a quiet that seemed used to witnessing such things. "She's yours," the woman said, narrowing her eyes into a bitter grin. "Keep her, if you can stand the silence." The man turned to the girl. He didn't reach for the ropes just yet. He looked, not into her eyes, but at her hands, at the red swelling around her wrists, at the bruise where her torn dress bared her shoulder. Then slowly, he pulled a folding knife from his coat and cut the bindings, gently, unhurried, as if every movement was a way of asking permission. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She gave the faintest shake of her head. "Do you have a name?" Silence again. "That's all right," he said, tucking the knife away. "The wagon's waiting. You can come. Or not. No one'll force you." She stood still, on the old wooden crate where she'd just been priced like a thing. No one urged her. Then her feet moved, slowly, carefully. Her heel touched the ground first, knees trembling, almost folding. But she stood, and the man didn't catch her. He walked beside her, slow enough she never had to rush. They left the square beneath eyes that never spoke. No one called out. No one blessed them. But the sunlight softened, and the wind passed over her hair like a hand that touched and let go. The wagon waited beneath an old oak, just a hauler's cart with a thin mule and crooked wheels. The man offered his hand for her to climb in, then took the reins without a word. She drank from the canteen he passed her. Just a sip. But it felt like something sacred. And in that fleeting moment, in the hush of dusk, with dust rising from the trail and the wheels hissing over dry gravel, she exhaled. Softly. Like it was the first breath she'd ever owned. And that was the day Redemption Ridge, a place that never needed a name to pass, judgment, witnessed something it would never speak of. A man who raised his hand not to claim, but to set free. The homestead lay deep in a sun-scoured valley where no road led straight. Only old wheel ruts carved into dirt and stone like a promise long forgotten. When the wagon rolled past a crooked gate hanging from one hinge, the girl saw a low wooden house, its roof slanted like it had held itself up through too many storm seasons alone. To the left, an empty horse stall. To the right, a lone oak, its crown halved by some long-past gale. The man said nothing as he tied the reins and lifted down a wooden chest. She asked nothing in return. The two of them moved like figures caught inside a desolate painting. No introductions, no applause. She stepped through the doorway behind him, into the smell of ash, pine sap, and time. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet. There were no curtains, just rough cloth tied over the windows. The hearth was cold. On the table, an oil lamp and an upturned cup. At the end of a short hall, a staircase sagged. He pointed and said simply, "Upstairs. Left room." She climbed, opened the door to a room tilted gently to one side. A plain wooden bed, a blanket folded tight. On the table, a glass of water and a folded note. "No need to wake early. No one here keeps time." For the first time in years, she lay on a bed behind no locked door. No footsteps creeping in at night. No whispered commands to leave. Sleep came, not from peace, but from sheer exhaustion. By dawn's first haze, thin as smoke, she was already in the kitchen. Wrapped in an old coat, a rag in hand, She scrubbed each dish and spoon like cleanliness might soothe the stains memory had left behind. He stepped in, straw dust on his shoulders. He paused, watching her for a moment. No praise, no protest. "You don't have to do that," he said. She didn't turn, just answered, "I don't mind." They ate in silence. Hard bread, boiled eggs, watered black coffee. No talk of weather, of crop prices, or why a man who'd been alone too long would bring home a stranger. Afterward, he went to the stable. She lit the fire. The day passed like a stone rolling downhill, slow, dry, and without complaint. She swept the porch. The broom broke midway. He fixed it without a word, set it back in her hand. She folded a frayed tablecloth. He returned later with new fabric from the shed, laid it on a chair. Didn't tell her to use it, didn't stop her either. That evening, he left a wool shawl on the banister, not handed to her, but placed where she'd see. A quiet way of saying, "Cold here doesn't have to be endured alone." She began to notice things. He fed the mule before sitting down to breakfast. He washed his hands before touching anything she'd touched. Every night, he said, "Sleep well," though she'd never once replied. And he noticed, too. How she flinched at thunder, even on cloudless days. How she peeled crust off bread before eating. How she never turned away from a raised voice. But her shoulders tensed like rope drawn tight. One night. She sat on the porch steps, staring toward the fields, where darkness held the horizon like something still unforgiving. He stood in the doorway behind her, eyes on the eaves where she sat, saying nothing. "You never asked where I came from," she said, voice thin as the cricket song. "And I never asked where you're going," he answered. They sat like that. Two figures not touching, not retreating. The wind lifted a tuft of dust from the porch and let it settle again, gentle as breath. She didn't know when it began, that she started changing the water in the dry vase by the window. That meals came with greens from the backyard patch. No one asked it. No one refused it. Each small act, wiping a broken chair, folding a dropped napkin, sweeping kindling by the hearth, was like placing a stone on a path she'd long forgotten she had the right to walk. One day, he came back limping harder from the barn. She sat on the step, set the bucket down, looked up. "Your leg," she said. "Old wind," he replied. "Winter injury. 3 years past." She asked no more, but next morning his boots were wiped clean of mud, placed neatly by the door. No thanks was said, none needed. In that house, with no name, no deeds, no rules, they began relearning how to exist, not through words, but in a glass set where it belonged, a blanket pulled over a shoulder, a door shut softly, but never locked. Love had not come, but the ground had softened. And in a world where once she'd been tied to a post like livestock, just having a man walk beside her, not holding, not claiming, only matching her pace, was already something close to a miracle. June arrived like a hard-headed woman, dragging sun that burned straight to the bone, yet leaving traces of chill in the corners beneath the eaves. The hill grass had grown tall, clover blooming purple behind the horse stall, and with it, peace seemed to have rooted. The girl began to smile, not wide, not often, but the kind that was real, and the man, the one who usually stacked wood with quiet precision, noticed. But the past does not rest easy. It has teeth, and sometimes it bites when the sky is clear. They returned to town for the first time since the day she left the auction square, just for thread, some salt, and a roll of jute. Small things. But Redemption Ridge had not forgotten, and it would not forgive. The store bell rang too loud when they walked in. The shopkeeper looked up, eyes skimming the man before landing, then pausing on her. A beat. Then he looked away, pretending not to see. She moved down the aisles carefully, like one crossing thin ice, picking out rice, pork lard, pumpkin seeds, until her hand reached for a spool of ivory thread. Another hand struck hers, sudden and cold. "Don't touch that!" The woman behind the counter snapped, bitter and sharp. "This ain't for whores." She froze, not from the sting, but from the words. Everything in the store went still. No one spoke. No one objected. She stared at her reddening hand, eyes brimming, not from pain, but from old wounds torn open again. The man stepped forward, slow, no questions, no need. He looked at her hand, then up. "If you lay another hand on her," he said, "you'll wish I'd chosen to raise my voice instead." No shouting, no cursing, but his words landed like rockfall in a canyon. The store seemed smaller. The woman shrank. No one laughed. No one hid behind pretense anymore. They left without the thread. But the storm had formed, not overhead, but in their bones. On the way back, she said nothing, didn't cry. But the hand that had been struck curled tight, holding something too raw to show. When the wagon jolted over a large stone and he stepped down to check it, she stayed seated, eyes fixed on the western fields where the hills wore the color of dusk. Then she spoke, quietly, but louder than any thunder. "You know, my mother sold me to a man on my 15th birthday. A few coins and a bottle of whiskey. She told me staying alive was luck enough." He didn't turn, just rested a hand on the wheel. Still. "I tried to run. Got caught. They locked me up for 3 days. No water. After that, I stopped counting. How many men? How many times? I stopped." Her voice cracked, like water finding its way through stone. "You bought me too. What makes you different?" He stood, faced her, no anger, no pity. Only a quiet truth, solid as bedrock. "Number I didn't buy you. I paid to cut the rope they were going to use to write your ending for you." That night, the skies turned. Clouds boiled from the north. The first thunder sounded like cannon fire beyond the ridge. Wind screamed across the bluff. He went out to the stable to tie down the tarp. She tried to follow, but he shook his head. "Stay inside." But when the rain came, fast and hard, like a memory bursting loose, she ran out too. She saw him stumble in the lightning's flash, gripping a post, bracing a loosened board. "Look out!" she cried. A heartbeat late, a snap. The roof collapsed. A beam fell, long and heavy, as if to end all things. She felt him shove her aside. His body hit the mud with a sickening thud. A groan. Blood spreading through his shirt. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling. "Don't move. Please don't." He nodded faintly. "Just a scratch." But blood doesn't lie. She helped him back to the house, cleaned the wound, salted the rag. Her hands knew pain, but it was the first time they shook, not for herself, but for someone she didn't want to lose. By morning, he lay on the long bench, shoulder wrapped in rough cloth. She sat at his feet, tending the fire. Neither said much. She touched the bloodstain on his coat, soft as a vow unspoken. For the first time, she chose to stay, not for shelter, not from force, but because here, this man did not look at her like a past to be buried, but like something not yet begun. On cracked earth where the grass had burned gold since late summer, August began to shift its voice. The sun still burned, but the wind had changed. It carried the scent of old straw, of heavy soil, and the quiet weight of something about to leave. That morning, she folded the last handkerchief and slipped it into her bag. No one asked. No one stopped her. No one came to see her off, but every movement rustled her dress like silk brushing the lid of a coffin, slow, careful, unsure what she had survived. The man stood on the porch, next to the wooden wagon, one hand resting gently on the neck of the old gray mule. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't ask if she'd return. He just said, "I'll take you to the fork. The rest is yours to walk." She nodded. There was no farewell between them, because there had never been a binding. No vows, no kisses, no paper. And maybe because there had already been too much between them that words couldn't touch. The mule began to walk. The wheels crunched over gravel. They left the homestead while the sun was still crouched behind the ridge, the light not yet golden enough to cast a shadow. She sat upright, clutching her bag, never once looking back. They passed the pine grove, the hillside willow that once held a crow's nest last spring, and the dried-out creek bed, places she had once moved through like a borrower, never an owner. The wind cut through her collar. She shivered, not from cold, but from realizing she felt nothing at all. No sorrow, no excitement, only hollow. The fork came into view, a clearing in the dirt. Two roads, one led toward town, wide, dusty, lined with doors that never opened. The other curved back into the valley, toward the slant-roofed house, the crooked stall, the stone well that creaked each morning. She pulled gently on the reins. Silence. The mule did not budge. She pressed her heel to the wagon floor. Useless, she urged again. Useless. It stood firm, like a rooted stump, head low, ears flicking as if it heard something unspoken. She turned to the man. His hand still rested on the wagon's edge, unmoved. "Your mule broken?" she asked. He answered slowly, eyes fixed on the road. "She was born here. She knows when someone don't truly want to go." She froze. Her fingers trembled on the reins. A breeze swept her hair behind her ear. And in that moment, she understood. She wasn't running away. She had simply never learned how to stop. I thought I wanted to leave," she whispered, "but all I feel is empty." He didn't reply, only let out a long breath, like he'd been waiting for those words. "Freedom isn't walking away," he said softly. "It's knowing you can, and still choosing to stay." She stepped down from the wagon. Her boots touched the dry earth, gravel cracking beneath her heels. Inside her, something split, not with pain, but like old wood giving way, letting light in. She walked toward him, not fast, not certain, but each step was a choice. When she was just a few feet away, she looked up. "If I choose to stay, can I be your wife?" The question landed between them like a seed, not knowing if it would fall on rock or rich soil. He looked at her for a long time, not to measure, not to test, but to remember the moment when a woman once sold, once struck, once silenced, dared to ask for something that was hers to claim. "Only if you truly want to," he answered. "No more, no less." She nodded. And for the first time in her life, she knew she wasn't being pulled, wasn't being held. She was standing still by her own will. They returned as the sun began to sink. When they reached the yard, the mule stopped on her own by the trough, exhaling like she had finished a task greater than pulling a cart. The girl didn't go inside right away. She lingered beneath the eaves, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a faded spool of blue thread. He stood behind her. Didn't ask. Didn't need to. She turned to him. "I've got nothing to offer," she said, "except myself." "That's enough," he replied. That night, there was no wedding, only 2 wooden cups, a soft burning oil lamp, and a tablecloth smoothed flat by hand. He sat at one end of the table, she sat at the other. Between them, silence. But it wasn't distance. It was a beginning. Autumn didn't arrive with the first cold wind, but with a different kind of silence. Softer, deeper, as if the land itself had exhaled after a long-held breath. At that homestead, no one called anyone by full names. Truth was, no real names had ever been spoken between them. But that never stopped the bond from forming, slowly shaping itself like a stream beneath stone, quiet but insistent, impossible to deny. Each morning, she rose before the rooster, set the kettle on the wood stove, wiped down the table like a ritual. No one told her to. No one watched. But the kitchen no longer felt like a place borrowed. It had become home. He rose after, stepping onto the porch with the faint crackle of his knees. She noticed he no longer winced at the sound. Maybe because by then, someone had started remembering to leave a scarf folded by the door latch when the wind turned cold. They never married, never signed paper. But every small gesture between them spoke the vows neither had ever said aloud. One afternoon, he opened the drawer beside the hearth, the one that once held an old photograph, faded from sun and dust. His first wife, the one whose shadow still lived in the quiet corners of the house. He looked at that photo for a long while, then placed it into a wooden box, folding it closed with care, like folding away a memory. He didn't burn it, didn't deny it, just put it away. In its place, he hung a square of embroidered cloth. It bore only 2 names, no surnames, no titles, and stitched beneath, in brown thread the color of turned soil. Enough. She saw it while carrying out a loaf of bread. She stopped, didn't speak, but her fingers tightened on the edge of the towel, as if holding on to something fragile, not out of fear, but disbelief that something so simple could be so kind. The people of Redemption Ridge were never quick to speak, but they had eyes. And over time, eyes learn what is true. One morning, while she was peeling apples on the porch, Mrs. Delagrange, a widow from near the southern pines, passed by. She held a jar of peach preserves and a piece of voile. "Heard you sew," the woman said, her voice no longer sharp like it had once been. She nodded. "My granddaughter's taking her vows next month. I need someone to make the dress." She looked up, hand pausing mid-peel. "You want me?" "No one stitches a straighter line," the woman said, placing the cloth on the rail. There was no apology, but it wasn't needed. That silence, that small, wordless offering, was a nod from the town, from those who once looked at her like a stain no one dared name. From that day on, she didn't just sew for herself. By the window, afternoon light spilled through layers of fabric as her hands worked the needle. Every stitch knotted a piece of a fractured life back together, connecting nights once locked behind doors to mornings where she could wash her face at the well without asking permission. She was no longer that girl sold off like old straw. She was someone who made something, by her hands, her will, her choosing. He remained the same, quiet, but every evening he repaired leaning fence posts and loose porch boards. The wood got replaced, but his silhouette stayed familiar, lean, rigid, and steady as mountain stone. One day, it drizzled soft. She stepped out to gather laundry and saw he'd built a small rain shield beside the well. Not grand, not pretty, but just enough to keep her dry while drawing water. And on the nail in the wall, he'd hung a handkerchief. the one she'd dropped while clearing hay weeks ago. He'd kept it, folded it, never threw it away. That night, after she washed her hands and stepped onto the porch, he was sitting quietly. The moon was slow to rise, casting its pale glow across the lines on his brow like time had carved them in. "You never asked what my real name was," she said gently. "No," he answered, "because you don't have to keep a name someone else gave you." A pause. She sat beside him. "If I chose a new one, would you call me by it?" "Absolutely," he said. "And you'll be the first name I speak each morning." The wind changed the morning they went back to town. No one called them. No one sent word. But still, they went, as if it was something that had to be done. Not to prove anything, but to rewrite a name that had once been carved wrong. In the wagon, he held the reins, eyes on the red dirt road ahead. Beside him, she sat quiet, hand resting on her skirt, no longer clenched like the day she left. This time, her fingers lay open, as if there was nothing left to grip and nowhere she needed to flee. The town hadn't changed, still hushed, hunched beneath sun-scorched eaves and half-shuttered windows. But something about it felt different. The looks weren't sharp like before, just passing glances. The murmurs weren't loud enough to cut, and strangely, no one laughed, no one sneered. Maybe because this time, they hadn't come as something bought and something owned, but as husband and wife. The county office was a single room behind the post house, where men signed tax slips and deaths were registered when fevers took hold in winter. The old clerk peered over his drooping glasses and nodded. "Marriage license?" he asked. The man nodded. She said nothing. They signed. No rings, no witnesses. Just two names scrawled on yellowed paper, the ink leaning a little from the tremble in his thumb. The clerk blew lightly to dry the ink, then slid the paper toward them without another word. They left town as the sun tipped west, slipping behind the ridge. The wind picked up, kicking dust along both sides of the road. She pulled her shawl close, head low, but there was no fear in her eyes, only the steady quiet of someone who knew she was walking on land she had chosen. In the wagon, he held out his hand. She didn't hesitate. Their fingers met, not to hold each other back, but like two rowers in the same boat, knowing where they were going and who was beside them. They left the town just as sunlight poured down the mountain like honey, warming their shoulders in gold and ash. No one came to see them off. But as the wagon turned, she looked back. Not with longing, but with clarity. This place no longer held them. The wind stiffened near home. Sagebrush leaned to the ground, dust rolling like low-tide waves. She covered her hair, but not her face. Her eyes stayed open, unflinching, because this time, there was nothing to be ashamed of. No one had to bow. He looked at her, then did something he never used to do without forethought. He reached for her, in open air. She did not pull away. Their hands met like two people rowing the same boat, not knowing how long the storm would last, but trusting they'd hold steady together. When they reached the house, she didn't get down right away. She sat still, not from doubt, but from looking. The porch roof curved like the back of an old man. The doorframe faded, but upright. The curtain she'd sewn from scrap still hung there, cleaner now. The house wasn't finer, but something had shifted. She removed her boots, set them side by side on the step, then stepped barefoot into the earth. Each step called back a piece of her. Brick, dust, splinters, everything answered. Not with words, but with the strange certainty of being known. She opened the door. She didn't wait for him, didn't look back. Her hand moved across the table, the cupboard, the back of his chair, not like a stranger, not with reverence, but as someone reclaiming what had once been taken. "Welcome home," she said, not loud, not wavering, just like someone who'd been away too long, now remembering how to speak beneath her own roof. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand. His heart didn't thunder like a young man's, but something warm stirred beneath his ribs, like old embers lit again by that one quiet sentence. That night, they ate in the kitchen, like they always did. But this time, she placed an extra bowl off to the side, for tomorrow's meal. A sign that there'd be more nights like this. No one mentioned the marriage paper. No one brought up what had been signed. But when he reached for the salt, she placed her hand on his, not to stop, not to ask, just to touch, as if to say, "I remember." When the wind howled past the barn, he threw on a coat. She didn't call after him, just picked up the oil lamp and followed. The flame danced with his stride. When he latched the barn door, she stood behind him, saying nothing, but present. Back inside, she dusted his shoulders, then hung his coat beside hers. Not because there weren't other pegs, but because that was its place now. They sat by the fire, not close, not far. The flame was low, the tea a little cool, but his hand, when he poured, didn't shake. She took the cup. Their hands met. No flinch, no words. Before heading upstairs, she paused. The kitchen looked unchanged, but the light reached into every corner, like it was seeing it all for the first time. "I used to think no one would ever want me long enough to call a place home," she said. He nodded, not as agreement, but because he had felt that too. "But now I understand," she continued. "Home isn't where someone lets you stay. It's where you walk in on your own and stay with all you have." He answered, voice low, warm as seasoned wood. And if someone's waiting on the other side of that door, then it never truly closes again. Winter arrived on the high plains in soft-soled shoes, quiet, steady, but unstoppable. The first snow didn't fall in flurries. It came like a reminder. The year was wearing thin, and what remained were the things that had withstood the storm. The wooden house, tucked into the hillside by a half-dried stream, was small, plain, and once so silent you could hear a clock lose its rhythm. But now, even without music, without riotous laughter, it had learned how to breathe, slow, but steady. She rose before the rooster. He never asked her to, but she liked steeping tea before the first light hit the porch. Not habit, gesture, a quiet way to say, "Today, I still choose to stay." The kitchen was kept not for cleanliness, but respect. Every item had its place. Tools were dried before being put away. No wet linens left overnight. The tablecloth changed every Sunday. No one gave orders. These things formed like trees bending toward sun. The old mule, once too stubborn to move, now stood still for the bridle, no longer flinching. Beneath the stall roof, it stood like an old willow, one that had seen both drought and flood. He once said some animals know the truth before men do. Maybe it had seen the change in her, that she was no longer surviving here, but choosing to live here. At noon, he returned from the northern woods, carrying an armful of white magnolia blown down by the wind. She looked up from her fabrics and smiled without a word. Big gust last night brought down a limb. Figured it deserved better than to rot in the dirt. She fetched a glass jar, poured warm water, placed each blossom inside, not as decoration, but as care for something nearly lost. Evening light spilled long through the window, brushing honey across the stitched cloth hanging on the wall. Enough. No one spoke of the first wife anymore. But no one erased her either. The photo now rested in a drawer, not forgotten, but replaced by something new. Not ink, not law, just two names, side by side, sewn by hand. Chosen. That night she served something new, a minted bean stew. He ate slow, nodded once. She smiled, not from praise, but because she had begun cooking not to feed, but to nourish. They didn't say grace before meals, but in the way he refilled her cup, or how she placed the best cut on his plate without a word, there was prayer in that. One morning came a knock at the door. It was the widow Della, arms full of cloth. She offered a square of white fabric. "My granddaughter's getting baptized," she said. "Heard you sew. Can you help?" She took it. Didn't answer right away. But when she stepped back inside, she spread the cloth on the wooden table, fingertips brushing the thread like it was a word spoken clearly for the first time. "We need you, not out of pity, but trust." That evening, he stood by the window, watching her work beneath the oil lamp's glow. "You're not that girl who was bought anymore," he said softly. She looked up. "And I know. I'm the woman who stayed." A few days later, he brought in a box carved from willow. Inside was a square of cloth he had learned to stitch, his calloused hands weaving red and yellow thread, uneven but legible. Her name, his, and at the bottom, enough. "Don't need a court to recognize it," he said. "Only need you to see it." She didn't cry. She laid her hand on the thread like sealing a mark. No ink, no parchment, just a palm remembering what it had chosen. One day, snow began to fall. First snow, quiet as old silk brushing across floorboards. She laid the tablecloth straight, placed an extra chair near the fire. Not for a guest, just because she wanted to. He came in, brushing snow from his shoulders. She handed him a towel. No invitation needed. He sat in the chair to her right, the one she always left open. They never said love, never used names like in books. But when he lifted the kettle to pour her cup first, or when she mended his coat without being asked, that love was there, like the light that seeps through wood slats without needing a lamp. If this story made something in your heart pause for a beat, leave a quiet mark below in the comments. Click like if you believe forgotten lives can still find a way to touch someone. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Echoes, a place for the kind of love that doesn't shout, but stands tall in the marketplace and does not bow.